With the recent terror attack in Orlando, President Obama and all of his buddies, they all took the opportunity to try to take away your guns. That being said, our friend Amy here has a video that she wants to tell us about.
So this is an old video. It's Wayne LaPierre, he's the CEO of the NRA, testifying before Congress in 1999, right after the Columbine shootings.
Let's talk about what's reasonable and what's not. We think it's reasonable to provide mandatory instant criminal background checks for every sale at every gun show. No loopholes anywhere for anyone.
So the reason why I chose this is because since then, Wayne LaPierre and the NRA have changed their tune, and they do not believe in universal background checks, mostly because they put forth this parade of horribles argument that once we do universal background checks, it's going to lead to gun registries for law-abiding citizens, and then guns are eventually going to be confiscated, which I think is ridiculous, because the Supreme Court has already said that there is a recognizable individual right to bear arms for self-defense. So, back then, when he believed that there should be universal background checks at gun shows, it was right after Columbine, and the Columbine shooters had purchased through an illegal straw purchase, so a friend of them went to a gun show and got the guns that they used to kill people. This weekend in Orlando, there are going to be 2 gun shows that are not being canceled, actually in Port St. Lucie, where the gunman is from the Orlando shootings. And so they're expecting a huge surge in gun purchases because obviously people want to protect themselves. They're scared. That's fine. I am all for you being able, if you're a law-abiding citizen, to be able to purchase a gun. But why should there be this loophole at gun shows and between private sales, even on the internet, where anybody can purchase a gun without a background check, without recording the sale, and without even having to show identification? What is the purpose of that? It undermines the Brady Law, and it undermines every type of gun restriction, so long as there is a place where people can go and purchase a gun without having to do or show anything.
Let me ask you a question. When we focus in on the Orlando shooter, right? He's obviously a terrorist. Do you blame all Muslims, or do you hold all Muslims accountable for what he did?
No.
Okay, so then why hold all gun owners accountable for what he did as a gunman?
Because the position of the NRA to this day, even while Wayne LaPierre will say it, is that if somebody is mentally ill, or if somebody's a convicted felon, or if somebody poses a risk, there should be background checks, okay? And the Supreme Court agrees with that. Let me just tell you, okay, there's been this big controversy about the ban on semi-automatic assault weapons, and they're used in the majority of mass shootings. And the government came out with a study, and it said, during 1994 to 2004, when we had that ban on assault weapons, it really didn't do anything because they're used in such a minuscule portion of crimes that it really didn't have much of an effect, so it's all a farce that would help. They are used in the majority, though, of mass shootings, and if you look from 94 to 2004, there were the same amount of mass shootings, about 40 mass shootings, as from 2004 to present. But the number of casualties was almost a third. That means we're not going to prevent mass shootings because someone could take a handgun, they could go in and kill somebody, right? But we can save hundreds of lives by banning high-capacity magazines.
All right, let me bring in.
Well, see, I don't necessarily agree with you. And the reason I don't agree with you, I think that we have to firm up the laws. So if the FBI went to interview him twice and even closed out the case, and I understand why the Bureau or a law enforcement agency closes out a case, had they been able to somehow trigger a mechanism in Florida or in the country that then lets you know that he went to buy a gun a week before and sends the Bureau of Law Enforcement to interview him, this shooting could have been prevented.
Yeah.
That's the loopholes that we have to close. Not the fact that Joe Blow is going to go out and buy a gun because he either wants to protect himself or he wants to go hunting on the weekends.
I agree with you, but listen, this guy was not the norm, okay? He passed a background check. So even background checks at gun shows, right, wouldn't have prevented it. Immigration ban wouldn't have prevented it.
Correct.
Maybe
so you still would have had a mass shooting then.
Right,
maybe if there was a guy standing at the door with a gun, right, he would have been able to take him out.
There was someone standing at the door. He couldn't take him out.
Not a no-gun area. The club itself was a non-gun area. I will tell you something. other than being in that type of club. If I was in a club with a gun and someone started shooting, you could be damn sure I would unload my 15, 16 shots out of my Glock 19.
Right, and
But
how
this
many
is my-
people would have been killed versus how many were?
No, but this is my
Wait,
exact
let
point.
Misty chime
Well,
in.
I absolutely agree with you. I think if you're on a terror watch list, absolutely not. But even if, as you said, you have a situation where you're being investigated for terrorism by the FBI, why isn't there some mechanism where law enforcement is advised? If this guy's walking in to buy a gun, I think the enforcement should know about it.
Let's keep in mind too that the biggest terror attack that was ever happened on U.S. soil didn't involve the gun.
Right, but when you talk about mass casualties, okay, all I'm saying is that we cannot prevent these attacks because, like in this circumstance, background checks wouldn't have helped, immigration ban wouldn't have helped, maybe even a ban on assault weapons wouldn't have helped. But if he didn't have the high-capacity magazines, and yes, he could have gotten them illegally, but let's say, had there been a ban, fewer people would have been killed. This wouldn't have been the worst mass casualty in American history. It wouldn't have been.
It's not the worst mass casualty in U.S. history. Oklahoma City with 168 people in April of
But mass
1995.
shooting, it's the worst mass shooting.
But you want to know something? You're still going to have shootings. So they have 10 bullets in a magazine or 15 bullets. It's not going to stop the lone wolf from walking into a major facility or a public hub and opening fire on people. You have to allow people to carry guns to protect themselves. That's what's going to stop it. Because you want to say, if I'm going to walk into Grand Central Station tonight as a lone wolf nut, that potentially some guy could walk up behind me as I fire that first bullet and put a bullet in me, it's going to stop it.
Yeah. The other thing, too, I think that we have to take into consideration here is that this guy picked up the guns and went and killed the people. The guns didn't pick themselves up.
Right.
All right? That's a big, huge thing here. This guy has shown radicalization on many different events, many different cases. I do blame the FBI for this. I think the FBI is a perfect example of an organization that is so overwhelmed, that has so many more cases than usual, that what they're doing, I go back to that thing I talked about earlier today, before we got on. It's that I Love Lucy whole episode where all the chocolates are going down and she can only pick out so many and she's missing most of the chocolates. The FBI is sitting here and they've got 10 cases, they could only handle 5 and 3 are slipping by, and this guy is the case.
I agree with that, but let me just go again to my point about the ability to save lives. Let's say we have, the 10-round magazines, and somebody like in Virginia Tech brings multiple magazines. Fine, but those few seconds that it takes to reload, that could save a couple of lives. I covered Newtown. I had to go up to the firehouse where the parents waited to see if their children had survived. And there were a lot of parents that did not get good news. If you look at the semi-automatic, the semi-autos that he brought 3 of them, but he brought 22 30-round mags and more than 500 rounds of ammunition. And those elementary school kids, almost all of them were shot multiple times. It's a second a bullet. A second a bullet. Why do we, to defend ourselves and to hunt, need more than 10 rounds and then we can't reload?
Amy, I'll make 2 points to you. First off, if he's reloading, you have to have a guy there to take him down.
Thank you.
And if the person doesn't, if it's no gun area or no gun zone, no one's going to take him down. He can take 3-4 seconds to reload from 10 to 20 bullets. It doesn't matter. So you have to have the ability.
Because in Colorado, where a movie theater shooting, the cops were there within 90 seconds. The whole thing lasted 2 minutes. Not as many people would have died if he didn't have those high-capacity mags.
You had a cop at the Pulse Club that night and 14 cops within 2 minutes to back him up, and it still didn't take this guy down for hours.
If law enforcement had been advised about that purchase, that's how you would stop.
Correct.
Amy,
more of these attacks.
I appreciate your passion. There's nobody who doesn't think about what happened in Connecticut, and you just, you get the chills. You think about it, especially if you're a parent, right? I mean, I could just only imagine my child being in one of those schools. But I go back to saying, I understand what you're saying. You're saying, hey, instead of 100 people, instead of 50 people dying in Orlando, maybe we could have just had 25. My argument is, let's make it so nobody dies. Let's make it so nobody dies.
I agree with you, but there's no way to prevent it. Most of the mass shootings in high schools, it was kids that took the weapons from their parents. What are you going to do? You can't ban people from having
we
guns.
could have prevented this man. We could have prevented this man. He was under FBI investigation twice.
This country is too PC.
And that's the other thing.
And the problem with this country is there were 4 or 5 people who have now come forward. Forget about his wife for a second, the second wife. Forget about her. Who have come forward and said, I reported this, or I told them about this. The company didn't want to do anything because he's Muslim. This country has to understand that these allegations and these people, I don't care what religion they are, and I don't care what background they are, has to start looking into these people and determining this person shouldn't be carrying a gun and this person should be under surveillance.
I agree.
There's a
And can I
mentality,
just go back to like when the Second Amendment came into existence, the Supreme Court went and looked back into the history. And the reason that it came into existence is because the Anti-Federalists were concerned that the government would become tyrannical and the people wouldn't be able to defend themselves. But they also said guns should only go to law-abiding citizens who can form a citizens' militia and are trained to use it. And the Supreme Court has said, we recognize that individual right to bear arms, but that doesn't mean that we would necessarily recognize the right for mentally ill people to get it, convicted felons to get it, or people on terror watch lists. So I agree with Tom on that point.
Real quick, because we only have 20 seconds left. I mean, from a legal perspective, the security company did not initiate anything because they were afraid of being sued. I mean, could they be sued because they got rid of this guy because he was a Muslim?
Oh my gosh, of course they could. And in fact, that is a hot topic. And employers are extraordinarily squeamish to take any action because the way the law is structured, it's very pro-plaintiff.
We'll be back.